Hi everyone, welcome to Excel with Dietetics. In this video, we'll look at how we can create our own calorie formula calculator. Now, aren't you tired when you have to calculate your own calorie formula that you might forget or type in the wrong numbers when it comes to the formula? Aren't you tired of downloading apps that calculates your calorie for you but may not necessarily have the formula that you want? And sometimes the app navigates from pages to pages with a little bit of lag in between. In Excel, or rather Google Sheet or a spreadsheet, we are going to learn how to create a calculator that suits our needs. Okay, now let's have a look at the formulas that we'll be working with today, which are your Harris-Benedict, Scofield, so on and so forth that you see on the screen. We are going to go through each formulas one by one and then combine them into a calculator page later over here. But let's start by recreating Harris-Benedict formula first. We are going to have Harris-Benedict. I'm just going to call it Harris, man and woman. For our formula under Harris-Benedict, you are only looking at very simple plus and minus as well as times. The only thing that might be a little bit hard to start with is putting an area that allows you to type in your weight, height, and age. So instead of having this Harris man and woman, I'm going to leave 3 rows. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I'm also going to hide these rows first. I can group them and have them hidden at the moment. Okay, so 3 things: weight in kg, height in centimeter, as well as my age in years, followed by the Harris-Benedict formula itself. Now, let's start by putting in some arbitrary value, say 65, 171, 170. And for my age, let's put 27. I'm going to resize my column so that it's easier to see. Now let's start writing our formula. For the man's formula, it's equals to, maybe I will zoom a little bit closer so that you can have a better look. Harris-Benedict formula is equals to 66.47 plus, you can just follow the formula exactly, 13.75 times it by the weight. Now notice that I have intentionally added a open and close bracket so that the multiplication formula would be calculated first before the plus outside of it. Next is plus and then another bracket for 5.003 times it by my height. Then outside of the formula is a minus 6.75 times it by my age in years. So that is my Harris-Benedict men's formula. I'm going to cut it and move it down to the men's area. Next, instead of recreating the formula from scratch, I'm just going to copy this formula. Control C, and then double clicking inside it and Control V to paste in. Now, since I have all of my placeholder already, namely the plus, the minus, the brackets, the multiplication, all I have to do is just to modify the numbers. This may be a faster way for you to type a formula that has a similar structure. Let's start by modifying the 66.47 to 65.1, followed by the 9.563 to replace our 13.75, then replacing our 5.003 with 1.850, not necessary to have a 0, but just to help us to have a better time looking and checking the formula later. Okay, so 655.1, 9.563, 1.850, 4.676. Age, height, weight, all in the exact same order. Now let's enter it. So that's for women. Okay, now we're going to learn how instead of having two cells, we can have a single cell returning for us the formula according to the gender. For that, we will need to add a gender cell, which will have man or woman as our input. There's a way to simplify having to type. Instead of having to type the gender yourself, we can choose from a drop-down. But I'm not going to explore that at the moment. I'm just going to put man and just have our very first formula up. Okay, now I'm going to move the Harris down here, and for this cell, our B26 cell, which is right beside our Harris, we are going to type in an if formula. Let's talk a little bit about the if formula first. Notice whenever I type in a keyword, a drop-down will appear, or in this case, a drop-down, giving us the formulas that we can choose from. We'll explore if today that returns value depending on logical expression. Choosing the if formula will then open up a syntax for us to refer to. This syntax tells us how are we supposed to write our formula. An if formula asks three questions. What is the question that you want to ask the formula? What is the, let me rephrase. Logical expression is the question you want to ask. Value if true is, let's say the question you ask returns true as the result. What is it that you want the formula to return? Followed by value if false, which is the flip side of the second argument. This also implies that the question you ask must be a close-ended question. In this case, I'm going to ask, is my B17 equals to the value man? Comma, to type out my value if true will be this cell, B23 cell. Followed by value if false, means that if B17 is not man, which usually means that it's woman, then I'm going to ask it to return B24, which is the woman's portion of Harris-Benedict formula. Okay, let's press on enter. Now it's returning for us 1628 for man, but if I shift my value to that of woman, then it will return for me 1464. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about the if formula. One thing that you may notice when I type out the text of the formula is I added double quotes, right? I added double quotes to enclose my text. Now it is important that every time you want to type a text inside a formula, you always enclose it within double quotes. Why is that the case? Let's say if I do not have the double quotes. You will notice that the color shifted from green to black. Notice also that for if, the formula itself is also black in color. This means that Google Sheet or the spreadsheet is recognizing the man as a formula. It is not recognizing it as a text. So now if I press on enter, it is just going to give me the name error because it doesn't know what range am I referring to or what formula am I referring to. So very important to have double quotes and put it inside. Okay, now to reduce the number of cells that we are going to use, we are going to cut out these two cells as well. So now notice that in my formula, it's B23 for the man's portion. I know inside B23, it's a formula that I'm already typing, which are these formula. Same things go with B24. The value that's showing 1464 is actually the result of this formula. So rather than having three cells for a single Harris-Benedict formula, I'm just going to have one right here. So all I gotta do is, for the B23 portion, I'm going to move the formula inside B23 down into it. So I will go in, cut out the whole thing except for the equal sign, cut it, then remove the equal sign, press on enter. Now come inside B23 highlight and just paste that formula in. Enter. Now, if I change my gender to man, it is now successfully changing the value to 1628. Same thing that we are doing for the woman's formula. Cut out the whole formula, leave the equal sign, delete it, press on enter, so you have an empty cell. Go in for the B24, highlight it, and then just paste with Ctrl V. Now our formula is now a little bit untidy, but let's just press on enter first to see if it works before we think about tidying up our formula. Now if I shift over to woman, it is successfully changing to 1464. Now let's talk about tidying up our formula. When we press on the cell, up here there's a formula bar. This formula bar allows you to actually add a line break. So if I have my cursor right behind this comma, I can press on the alternate plus enter, alternate and enter to bring it down one line. Again, I can go behind this comma and add an alternate enter, which is a line break. To make it even easier to see, you might consider moving this very last closing bracket, also a line break down, to signify to you that this bracket is actually the bracket that closes the if formula. Now let's just press on enter. We didn't change anything about the formula, just making it easier in the future when we want to edit it, knowing that this first line is the question that we ask, the second line is the value that is returned if the question that we ask returns true, and the last line is if the question returns false. Now, so this is the Harris-Benedict formula. We can now delete the man and woman portion and explore the next formula, which is our Scofield formula. I'm going to ungroup these lines. Start choosing the option to hide instead. So I will hide the Harris-Benedict formula and hide the rest of the formula that we are currently not exploring. Okay, so this one is also another man and woman. And I'm going to repeat the steps that we did for Harris-Benedict very quickly before we move on to other formula. So for Scofield, it starts with, for the man, is equals to 88.362 plus 13.397 multiplied by the weight itself. Okay, the weight plus, we're going to add a bracket. Inside the bracket, we're going to type 4.799 multiplied by the height in centimeter. Go outside the bracket, add a minus, another bracket, 5.677 multiplied by the h. Okay. Now, we're going to continue and do the same for the head. Just going to copy the whole formula and then paste it down here and just change the values. The structure is going to be the same. 593 followed by 9.247 followed by 3.089 and 4.330. This is the woman's formula. Now, we're going to add another cell here called oven, and for the oven part, we're just going to perhaps copy, no need to copy the formula, perhaps I will show another way to do it. So equals to if this cell equals to men, well, alternate enter for the line break, I'm going to have this value. If not, I'm going to have the woman's value. Okay, now at the moment it is a woman's value, 1458. I can also choose to shift it to 1621. Now remember that in our Harris-Benedict formula, we use 3 lines to do this. Okay? It requires the person who's reading the formula to first understand that this second line is referring to a man's formula. This third line is referring to a woman's formula. We can use a let function, let function, to simplify our if formula, or rather how we organize our formula. It makes it easier for people who are reviewing your formula to understand what you're saying. Let me show you why. Let's talk about the let formula first. So the let formula here says evaluate formula expression using declared name arguments. If I now open a bracket, or rather I should type it here so it's easier to see. It doesn't seem to be giving me any sort of argument syntax. Let's see if I can show it here. It's also not showing me the syntax unless I press on the question mark to the right just now. But let me show you again. If I can close this. If I have it closed, you can click on this question mark to open up the syntax. The syntax is the name of your argument followed by the value of your expression. Then you repeat that pattern with the very last of your argument being the formula expression. Let me show you what I mean. So I know that this is Owen for men. And in my let formula, I can choose to type equals to let. The name would be Owen. Okay. Then I'll put in this formula. Then I add a line break. So I know that this formula is man type for Owen. Okay. Then I can continue to type out my formula. But let me put a few placeholder first, just to close that formula. So it's round returning to 1. So this is for the female. So I can come in and type out Owen, woman, and paste in that formula. Now people know that this line is referring to Owen, woman. Again, I'm going to put a placeholder at the very end of the formula. And finally, I'm going to have the if formula here. So I'm going to cut this out, put it inside my let formula. We are going to type our formula a little bit different. So if my B17 equals to man, I'm going to return Owen, man. If not, I'm going to return Owen, woman. Then close the bracket. Why is it that I can write it this way when I'm writing inside a let formula? Because a let formula will first have a bunch of different names and different expression corresponding to the name. So that's just assigning a value to the respective names. The very last argument will start using all of the arguments that you have defined previously, which are your Owen man, Owen woman. All of the values, you can call them within this let function. And when it calls them, it's the same as pulling these formula right into that value. Okay? Now, let's press on enter and see what happens. It is successfully returning for me 1621. for my oven. Let me move this over here. So this is the oven one. If I shift it to woman, it is now very for me 1458. Now it's not wrong for you to want to do it like this, which is the same as Harris, but it might make your code a little bit easier for people to comprehend using the let function. Right. So that's for oven. Let's talk about the last formula that we'll explore today, and the rest of the formula you can test out on your own, which is the quick method formula. The quick method formula simply multiplies the body weight by 25 kcal for men and 22.5 kcal for women. So let's practice writing it again, but instead of having to write it in a separate cell, now we are going to do it right inside a cell. So this is the quick method. We're going to focus here. Shift this and change the color. Now it's equals to, if this cell equals to men, you can of course also change it to woman if you understand the logic so far. But here I'm just going to stick to men, the same pattern that we'll be using. If this is men, then I'm going to take the kilogram, times it by 25. If not, I'm going to take the kilogram again, times it by 22.5. Let's change this to men. Now it's 1625. Okay, now you more or less have your calculator. I'm going to call this calculator. Here, let's put a unit. Change this, give it a border, and put it in the middle. Let's put these in the middle as well, and change these to no decimal place. Okay, the last thing that we'll explore is data validation. It's been very tedious of having to type out a man or woman by yourself, and when you type it out, it's very easy for you to get the spelling wrong. Maybe you type the wrong button. So let's do it just like how we did in the app. In the app, you will have a drop down. We can add the drop down by data validation in spreadsheet. You can do it by right-clicking on the cell you would like to have a drop down, scroll all the way down, view more cell actions, data validation. Clicking on it will open up for you a side panel. In Google Sheet case, it's a side panel. In Excel case, it's a window. Here, you are allowed to add a rule. To access the same panel, you can also go to the menu, bars on top, and choose the data option. Opening up that data option also gives you access to data validation. Let's use this data validation and add a rule. In the rule, I get to have few options. Now, before we go into detail, before we make one, let's talk a little bit about what's in here. Apply to range simply refers to, let's say the moment you execute this rule, which cell is going to have the drop down. The criteria by default is going to be drop down, but you can also have a few other things when it comes to data validation. It's actually in the name. It will validate your data according to the rules that you have set. So it's not necessarily just a drop down. And then you have the section that allows you to add your option. Let's try man and woman. You can also shift the color. So I'm going to shift the color here and press on that. Now I can open and choose man and woman. But you may not want your drop down to be a cheap start. So to edit your data validation, as long as you have your data validation rules side panel open, it will show you every rule that's existing inside your current worksheet. All you have to do to edit it is to click on it and roll down to Advanced option. Advanced option allows you to change how your data validation appear. I'm going to choose arrow instead, and let's also try if the data is valid, if the data is invalid, show a warning. But prior to that, maybe it's best for me to show you what it means to reject the input. Let's say for some reason, instead of choosing from the drop-down, you type something accidentally. Let's say there was a problem, it says. The rule is set, please enter only one of the following values, man or woman. It will not allow the cell to take the value U, but we can allow the cell to take the value if we choose show a warning instead for if the data is invalid. Now if I press on done and try to have the cell take on the value U, it will take it on, but when you hover over the cell or select the cell, it says input must be an item on the specified list. Let's talk the last advanced option, which is show help text for a selected cell. This is useful when you have reject the input as your data invalid option. I can type something telling them that please choose only man and woman, just so that my help box is easier to see. Now when I press on done and try to have another value, say TER, just an arbitrary spelling, instead of a long text telling me that, hey, a data validation rule is set, this is the value you can choose from, it will just say, please choose only man and woman. Man or woman. Let's edit that, man or woman. Okay, now if I type in TER, please choose only man or woman. So this gives you an easier time on choosing the gender and having your calculator respond to it. That's all for this video. Feel free to test out with all of the other formulas that's available, and I'll see you in the next Excel with Dietetics video. Bye bye.